Okay, I'm Mark Schmidt. I'm a Boisean. I'm a native Idahoan who, as I grew up prior to my military service, was just not allowed to live in Idaho. My dad was born and raised in Gooding, Idaho. 1921 was born. Lived a tough life during the Depression. Never knew his dad. He was a first-generation German. So his dad was murdered the day he was born, as a matter of fact. His mother was devout Catholic, lived in Gooding. I think she was the town wash lady, held to high moral standards for her daughter and her son. And it looked like it was going to be not just a tough life growing up, but a tough life for the rest of his life. Along came World War II. Dropped out of 10th grade. Belonged to the Idaho National Guard. He was a master mechanic at that age. A phenomenal person. Did I mention tough? But he grew up that way, and everybody wanted to go join the service. He was no exception. Tried to get in the active Army, and they said, "You're flat-footed." Tried to get in the Navy, and they said, "You're flat-footed." So he went down in Boise, and he sat in a Bernie chair, and they were screening people for the Army Air Corps. And a Bernie chair is a chair you sit in, you strap in, and they spin you around, upside down and around. If you don't barf, you're in the Army Air Corps. So that's what he did. He left Idaho and went off to serve in World War II. He was one of the American heroes and an Idaho hero during the war. Got the Silver Star for he and his flight single-handedly sinking the Japanese cruiser, the Atasugi. And there was a huge article in the New York Times, and they would usually reserve the front page as it opened up, not front page, excuse me, the middle section was a huge pictorial sort of thing of what's going on in the war once a week. And there was a thing for Lieutenant George R. Schmidt, Gooding, Idaho, sinking the Atasugi. That picture is not only famous because of the kind of thing that happened. He sunk this Japanese cruiser, excuse me. But there's a big splash in the background, and it was Lieutenant Dean, my dad's wingman, as he hit the water. He didn't come back from that mission. That brings up a couple things about our veterans, and I bring up my father as an example. We did a lot of great things, but we lost a lot of great people. And that's what Veterans Day and the Armistice Day, where it started, was all about. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for the invitation to come speak today, and I'll thank the President and all his Vice Presidents, Professor Joe Welker over there, who is also a veteran, a combat medic, and also the guy who currently is triaging my taxes and my accounting system in the Powderhouse Brewing Company, which is what I do right now. The first order of business has already been done. We recognized and appreciate the veterans who are here today. I give my heartfelt thanks for the opportunity to stand here and add my appreciation for their service and what they've done in our country. I was in the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in '72. Went to fighter training out of pilot training. That takes about 2 years. And I was 6 weeks from going to the Vietnam War to Tak Ly, Thailand. And the Paris Accords put a shutdown to the pipeline of all those combat pilots in the Air Force, and they had to divvy up. Now what do we do with these guys? We're actually getting rid of pilots now. We're going through a demobilization, essentially, of pilots. So I was about to get an assignment to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. I'm a single second lieutenant. That sounded pretty cool. And they came down and said, "We're really getting crowded down here because all these guys coming back from Thailand and Vietnam. We got to send you to Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho." Sorry. Okay, you owe me. And as I walked out the door, I'm going, yeah, send me to that briar patch. And I went. And so that was the beginning of my career. So 34 years later, probably well overdue, I retired 2007 from the Air Force and came to Idaho for the first time to get to live. With my dad, my family, we traveled the world. I got to know lots of veterans, mostly the old Army Air Corps guys and Air Force guys. And then later in my career, half my career was spent in joint assignments. As I was introduced, I'm a retired 3-star. From about the 1-star level up through 3 stars. Most of the people that I was in a command with or I commanded were Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. In some joint assignments, we also had some folks that were veterans that were folded into CIA, DEA, NSA, and all those numbers. And so my experience with veterans of all services is pretty steep. And I'm honored and I'm humbled to be able to stand here and represent them at CWI today. So I do appreciate that. 3 things that I would talk about on a Veterans Day. Number 1, why is it this day? And I told Dallas that I would cover that for you. It's not real technical, it's historical, and I'll talk about that. And who are our veterans? Everybody doesn't know that. Back in the time of the draft, it was sort of obvious. The population of our military, which was huge, about 3.5 million people when I came in. The Air Force was 880,000. It's down to 315,000 right now. I say down to, and that's active duty. People knew who the veterans were. They knew who they were in their communities. After World War I, World War II, they knew who they were. We are small, and we're getting more and more centralized with an all-volunteer force, and I'll talk about those veterans. And the third thing I'll talk about, and this is something that I think about a lot, why would we consider veterans a national resource or even a national treasure in our history and even now? So why this day? Civilizations and nations have always honored their warriors and their leaders. The world is full of statues and monuments to those people. But they don't have statues and monuments of all the people that are veterans of their wars, of their fights to sustain their civilizations and their nations. The full enterprise has never really been honored, and there's never been really a day that says our country will stand down, pause, and think about our veterans. All the way back to the Peloponnesian Wars of the Greek city-states until World War I. On the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour of 1918, after the Great War, the most destructive war in the history of humankind, 20 million dead, Western civilization stood still and said, it's over. It was the Great War. It was the war to end all wars. We need to remember this. And chiefly among what we need to remember are those that died. Get through this. I'm being blown in the wind here. The armistice was signed on that day, but it really didn't cause the peace or institute the peace until much later, almost a year later, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. And the Treaty of Versailles was the instrument that probably caused the next Great War because of the treatment and the way it was done. And it left a standing country that was disarmed, but it didn't go away. And that was the next war. So in that, Western civilization had to take a pause to heal and not forget. There's a poem that almost every European grade school child still remembers from the Great War in Western civilization, whether it's in French, whether it's in English, Belgique, whatever language. the Western civilization, it was called in Flanders Field. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row. If you look behind us, all over Europe, there are American cemeteries interspersed with the European cemeteries where we still have our interred. If you've ever had the opportunity to go to a D-Day or V-Day in Japan, VJ Day event, you'll see that American cemeteries are still all over the world, not just in the United States. I've had the opportunity to go to Tunisia and Algeria as a representative to those cemeteries where our servicemen never came back. They're still interred in other countries because we just couldn't bring back as many as that died. Armistice Day, November 11th, that's tomorrow. Observed is today. If it falls on a Friday, on a Saturday, like it does this week, then it falls on today and it's observed. If it was on Sunday, it would happen on Monday. Congress passed a resolution on 1926, it took a while, before they observed it on the 11th of November, and it was called Remembrance for the Armistice. Armistice Day was changed after World War II and after the Korean War to be more inclusive by President Eisenhower, and it became Veterans Day. But the date moved around. It was an order of convenience to make that happen. In 1978, it was moved and determined that the 11th of November, back to the World War I date, would be observed from now on. Today, on the observed day, Veterans Day honors the duty, sacrifice, and the service to nearly 25 million veterans of all wars. So who are our veterans? When I grew up, I knew who they were. In the stairwells in Germany, in the housing in Taiwan where we lived, in other places where my father moved as an active duty airman, a German speaker. I knew who they were. I remember Fred Lewis lived across the hallway from us in 1953 to I was 4 years, 1953 to 1957. He would alternately leave, his family would stay there, and he would go to Korean War. It ended in 1952. So he would alternately go from the Iron Curtain, our side, to the Bamboo Curtain, our side, back and forth. We had demobilized, but we still had very few people to do all the things that had to be done, even after the Korean War. That was my very first recollection of veterans. My last recollection of people of World War II fame was Chauncey Reese. Some of you may have known him. He passed away 18 months ago. He instructed P-51 training at Gowan Field. Didn't go to the war, okay, because they needed him to be an instructor here in Idaho. His reward was to go to Korea as a ground FAC, forward air controller. And he spent a year in the snow in the mountains directing airstrikes. Came back from that, served in a number of capacities, flying fighters. The first time they flew F-86s out in Gowan Field. Flew for the airlines. Had a car company. Did numerous things. Was a leader in his church. I had the opportunity to know him, and I do his eulogy. One of the finest men I've ever known. Humble, quiet. You would never thought that he was a veteran. His character was beyond reproach. And he is one of those 500,000 veterans from World War II that was still around. And we'll miss him. That's a veteran in my eyes, and those are members of our community, members that you just don't see, but they're pillars. They're the heart and soul of what we are today. Veterans, what makes up a veteran? It doesn't matter if you are in the uniform of our country, war or peace, stateside or overseas, active, guard, reserve, volunteer, or whether you were drafted, honorably separated, or retired. Generally accepted, that's in the past tense for a veteran, but in the current tense, those actively serving today are also considered veterans. What about heroes? Consider them all, every one a hero. I had the opportunity to speak at the Warhawk Museum Vietnam commemoration about a year and a half ago. Gave a presentation. Mine was the political military part on why we were in Vietnam. There were a lot of misconceptions. But when I finished that, a lot of the older vets would come up and want to talk. I remember distinctly one of the vets came up and he said, "General, I was just a cook in the Army, so, I was just a cook." And I had to stop him right there, and I wanted to talk to him about that. What do you mean, just a cook? And how long have you been saying just a cook? He goes, "Well, we came back from Vietnam. I didn't talk about it much, but I was just a cook, so, I just don't talk about it." I said, "You should. You served your country, and just a cook. Did the Army need to eat?" Well, of course they did. Well, what if they didn't? Would you have added 10 pounds of dry rations to every backpack, to every soldier? That's what they would have had to done. Don't denigrate or demean your service. And I was just kind of shocked because I thought we were past the Vietnam humble, can't talk about it, didn't get appreciated thing. And so the next time I spoke, that was the topic and that was the main point of what I wanted to talk about. Thousands of people, just like World War II, just like the Cold War, Vietnam, the Gulf War, our veterans come out of all fields of service to their country: supply, maintenance, medics, truckers, tankers, engineers, air crews, ship operators. All are necessary, all in uniform, all vets, and to my mind, all heroes. Veterans today, they're the ones who serve and protect the U.S. As we sit here and don't think about them today, I have a son in Afghanistan right now. It's his 5th time. Each one of those tours is about 8 months. We help with the grandkids. If he wasn't serving in that capacity right now, I don't know, with all the things I have to do with my business, that I'd be thinking about veterans. It's Veterans Day that brings a focus to those things and those times and those people. And we appreciate you for being here today to think about it. I know it's a little chilly and still a little windy. We still have about 25 million veterans, of which 16 million are veterans of a war. 2 million of those veterans are women. 7 million veterans are from the Vietnam War era. 5.5 from the Persian Gulf War. Of the 16 million that served in World War II, which is the largest casualty, most destructive war, not just for the United States, but for the world. There's still about 500,000. They're still alive. We have to honor them. And don't forget the 2 million in the Korean War that seem to be forgotten. Those vets are there. Back to my father and those of his generation. My father was a veteran. He was a lieutenant in World War II. He was a captain in the Korean War and served. He was a full colonel in the Vietnam War and served. And the entire time we were at the Cold War, that was a daily activity for him. in numerous assignments. These are our veterans. They served not just a war veteran, but multiple war veterans. A third of our veterans live in 3 states: California, Florida, and Texas. And that has a lot to do with our VA system that takes care of them. This is getting sporty up here. But why are they a national resource? They're not a natural resource. They're a national resource. Why? If you go all the way back to the Great War, the war to end all wars, and then the following wars, we demobilized 12 million men out of our forces after World War II. It was a rapid decompression. They went out. Where did they go? They were skilled. They were combat engineers. They were aviators. They were organizers. They did all those things. They built our airways. They built our highway system and infrastructure. Businesses, large and small. And government, if you weren't a vet, you probably weren't in government. From Eisenhower throughout the entire governmental systems. Small community governments as well as national. There are skills that are learned in the military that are applicable and have been and continue to be. Technology emanates from those vets and shows up in our Silicon Valley. The technology shows up, CWI, other schools, other institutions of learning and of development. So the resource of a vet is global awareness as well. Very few vets get away with coming in for 3, 4, 5 years and not serving overseas to the state, on a deployment at least. And what do they have there? What do they know about? They come back to a community in the United States that's busy doing their business. And they're aware the world is full of despots, dictators, bad places, and bad people. They're aware of the threats of radicalization. They're aware of the threats for those who would do harm to us. Those people are the people we need in our communities to make sure we don't lose sight of why we have freedoms and who they owe that to. So with that, I'll wrap this up. The wind's been blowing. And those that are sitting are probably a little cooler than I am. But I appreciate the opportunity to come up here and talk about Veterans Day. The original Armistice Day, the Veterans Day, and just the sense that we have in our community treasures. Thank you very much.